2022 was a great year for gaming. If you liked waiting, that is. Seriously though, this year started out really strong, but then it would suddenly just take months before the next game would release. Comparing this to 2023 on the other hand, which looks like one of the best years we've had for gaming in like a decade, with Resident Evil 4, Dead Island 2, Breath of the Wild 2, Diablo 4, Final Fantasy 16, the Dead Space remake, and much more. Let's also not forget that Hytale promised that we would have like a beta or something in 2023. I don't know. With all that said, I mean, some notable games did end up coming out this year. We had Lost Ark finally get localized, which ended up having a 20-hour main story that you had to beat in order to get to the fun endgame content. Then there was also that other game that, what was it called? Oh yeah, that really forgettable game, Horizon Forbidden West. Seriously, that game was about the same as the first game. It started out really strong, but quickly became one of my most hated games as I ended up getting to the late game grind. Kirby Forgotten Lands is a game that I think nobody's going to forget for a while, because that was a good ass game, never mind just being a Kirby game. And Resident Evil Village ended up having the weirdest DLC I've ever seen. I still loved it anyways. But let's also not forget Tower of Fantasy came out, which was a pretty fun Genshin knockoff. But with the way that enemies scaled in that game, it feels like you actually get weaker the higher you level up your character, because the enemies scale with your level. Multiverses also came out and was a pretty good Smash Bros. Clone. Personally, I really am not the biggest fan of fighting games though, so I kind of got bored with Multiverses in like a week. Oh, and Diablo Immortal ended up coming out as well. You remember, that's that game where all those streamers were complaining about like how pay to win it was, and then they proceeded to spend $10,000 on the game to show everybody how broken it is. No, I had my fun with Diablo Immortal, I genuinely did, but the end game fell off hard. All right, that's enough about the runners up, okay? Now let's get to the big boy list. The Mortuary Assistant is an odd pick for this list, but it was one of the most genuinely scary games I've ever played. Rather than just relying on a bunch of stupid jump scares like those dumb old Five Nights at Freddy's games, Mortuary Assistant manages to do something that most horror games are scared to do: build tension. Seriously, the scares in this game are so subtle that most of the time you won't even notice them, which does a fantastic job in building up the mood. You're always wondering what's gonna happen next. You're always worried about what's gonna happen next. Best of all, the scares are all different each time you play, so it's not like a one and done horror game. Cultic was a wonderful surprise for me. I tried the demo and it reminded me of this old ass game I used to play called Blood. I remember downloading Blood on LimeWire and it only ended up having the first few levels. I didn't realize that it was the demo of the game, but I would replay those levels over and over again. And so I got really good at them while just enjoying them more and more as I got better at the game. Cultic was a treat because it made me feel nostalgic, but the gameplay felt modern with how fast-paced and responsive it was. I cannot wait for Act 2, but I know it's going to take a long time before it does come out, because this game is being made by a single developer. Even the music is.
Dude, stop, let me go.
Samurai Bringer is the sleeper hit of the year for me. I'm pretty sure I'm the only one that's even played this game, which is a damn shame considering how impressive it is. See, I started playing this game because of the graphics. I mean, look at this. It looks really cool, right? But it quickly became one of my favorite roguelikes because the insanely complex create a custom class. Like, no joke, you can combine hundreds of different skills to just make up your own abilities. I sincerely hope this game ended up making enough sales to warrant a sequel, and I hope that that sequel adds multiplayer. That would just be a dream come true for me. You guys remember Zenith? Apparently Geoff Keighley didn't, because this game wasn't even nominated for any of the VR Game Awards. Why? Zenith is the best VR MMO game out there. Like, you can climb everything and glide anywhere like Breath of the Wild. Each class has their own distinctive playstyle that does require a bunch of weird different moves with your hands because this is a VR game. And ironically, my only problem with the game is that it was too grindy for a VR game. Like, you're often stuck doing repeatable quests until you're strong enough to end up entering the next area, which is fine. I expect that of an MMO, but you gotta consider that in Zenith, you're doing that for hours on end with a big box strapped to your face. Like, the only reason I never ended up getting to the end game is because it was just becoming too taxing for me to end up hooking up my VR headset every time I wanted to play. Or, ouch, my neck hurts because I've been playing for 10 hours with this stupid thing strapped to my face. Grounded is one of the only survival games I actually enjoyed in a very long time. Like, survival games aren't normally my favorite type of game genre, but Grounded was just such a cool spin on it. You know, being a whole Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, you're tiny in the backyard fighting giant bugs is just such a cool concept, right? Granted, it probably sucks playing this game single player, but thankfully, Grounded was on Game Pass, so I got to play it with all my buddies for dirt cheap. The full version of the game did end up coming out this year, but it was kind of, it was a letdown, okay? I was recording it, I was planning on doing some videos on it, but it was just such a bummer. Like, we were about to beat the game, but the final mission locks you behind some dumb wave defense thing that in itself requires you to go through the entire map, completing all of the other mini side quest wave defense missions so that you can get a bunch of buffs so that you can end up actually handling the end game wave defense. And wave defense is not fun. It's still an awesome game that I highly recommend if you end up having some friends to play with. Yeah! Gloomwood may only have about 2 hours worth of content right now, but I've replayed through those 2 hours so many gosh darn times I can't even count it anymore. What can I say? I really love these modern old school games. Gloomwood is a stealth game at heart, but I love how accessible it is. Like, it really reminds me of the old Thief games, where sure, you are meant to avoid combat, but your character is more than capable of handling the enemies if you're forced to. I'm really looking forward to seeing the future content in this game, but unfortunately it's another one of those indie titles that has such a small team that I'm not really expecting to see a full release for quite some time. Last of Us Part 1 is a remake, yes, so technically this game came out in 2013, so we shouldn't be talking about it. But this was my first time playing through it, and goddamn, I'm glad that I waited. Like, this story is probably one of the best stories in video games to date. But the most memorable part of this game for me was how the ending was just so open-ended. Like, it seriously blew me away. That and the water. Like, just look at this. This is ridiculous. This is the best water I've ever seen in a video game. So yeah, even though this game was made in 2013 and technically shouldn't end up even being on the Game of the Year list, frankly speaking, I gotta put this game on my list strictly because the water. God of War Ragnarok is so goddamn good. You see, the standard for AAA games these days has people thinking Sonic Frontiers is good. Ragnarok is the rare full package. It has an incredible story, great combat, and I only maybe ran into like one bug. And no crashes. The main quest took me around 20 hours, and while I thoroughly enjoyed myself with it, it was only after I started grinding the side quests that I started feeling, okay, this is a little too much deja vu to the first game. And because I didn't want to poison my opinion of Ragnarok, I just stopped playing it right then and there. The Callisto Protocol is the spiritual successor to Dead Space, made by the original developers. I still very fondly remember Dead Space. It was one of my favorite horror games at the time before EA ended up destroying it. The thing that I was really surprised about with Callisto Protocol is that it manages to feel familiar, but the combat and gameplay itself feels very distinct and feels like its own thing. What I find so impressive about Callisto Protocol is that it manages to blend all of these mechanics into one where they all complement each other. Except for the gravity glove. That thing pretty much just stands on its own as like an overpowered god weapon, and I loved it. The story in the game is serviceable. It's not like fantastic or anything, but there's not necessarily anything that I would complain about with it. I really do like the main character and how he just kind of, okay, you're in my way, die. My only real complaint with this game is that when I played it, it ran like ass. Seriously, what's with these AAA companies not realizing that they need to actually optimize these games for consumers? Core Keeper is one of those rare games that doesn't really look impressive, but then you start playing it and you can't put it down. I am so glad that I suffered through this year's PC gaming show. Most of that show was awful, just showing a bunch of RTS games and crap that nobody cared about. But then suddenly it shows Core Keeper in a different light than I'd seen in the trailers, and I was like, yeah, I'll give that game a shot. Like, I saw some gameplay before and I knew that the game was super popular. I just didn't want to commit to buying it yet. Now, in retrospect, I feel like an idiot for not getting the game sooner, because seriously, this game is like a top-down Terraria. It's so good and it's so chill. Top that with the fact that this game's like, what, 10 bucks? And also, you can play it with like a total of 8 people in your world? Scorn was one of those games that I'd been waiting for since it was on Kickstarter. While it did have a pretty rough launch, I am genuinely happy to see that the mixed Steam reviews are gone. Like, I'll acknowledge that the gameplay kind of sucked, but the story and the world are just so abstract and dark. There was just something very strange and obscure about this gem of a game that really spoke to me as a person. Like, you know when you see a picture and go, that's a mood. Scorn is a mood. Like, the atmosphere is so thick you can taste it, which probably says that there's something wrong with me. Dying Light 2. Why is nobody talking about this game? Seriously! Once again, I think Geoff Keighley was being asleep at the wheel. How could he forget about this game? It wasn't nominated for anything in the Game of the Year awards. Why? I loved this game. Like, you spend the first 10 hours in the starting area, which was already super duper fun, and then you're suddenly whisked away into this big ass city and given a glider. On top of that, you also get to choose which faction you help as you progress through the game, which doesn't really change the story too much, but at the very least, it gives you different gear and adds things to the map that you can interact with, like turrets or jump pads. And on top of all of that, Dying Light 2 has multiplayer. It would already be a solid single player game, but the fact that I could play this with my friends? Why wasn't this nominated for Game of the Year? I don't think anyone is surprised, but the reason is far more than just me being a Souls game fan. See, Elden Ring is to Souls games what Breath of the Wild was to open world games. What both of these games managed to do is make every other game in their genre feel dated. Seriously, this is the best Souls game out there, with a staggering amount of weapons and armor and spells that the player can choose from, and a world worth exploring. Like, Elden Ring is littered with secrets that reward the player's curiosity with new gear, or an entire underground network of caves that has a unique boss at the end. Or how about the secret underground cave in the secret underground cave that has this guy in here, which I absolutely hated this boss, but my god, it was thrilling when I beat him. I think the best thing about playing Elden Ring was that I got to play it day one. You see, I only played Dark Souls 3 long after everything had been discovered in the game. But with Elden Ring, nobody knew anything. It felt truly magical, knowing that when I was doing something, I was the first along with like hundreds of thousands of other people. There wasn't 5 wiki pages dedicated to the best builds yet. Everybody was sharing all the secrets we found, teaming up to beat this hard-ass game. And unfortunately, that magic is gone. The PvP meta is out there for assholes to grief new players and act like they're good. People have beaten the game without taking a single hit, but it's very, very difficult for a game to become like one of my all-time favorites of my life, and Elden Ring is right up there with the best of them. I beat the game like 3 or 4 times on different characters after spending 200 hours on my main character, and I loved it every single time. See, the thing is, because I've already done basically everything in Elden Ring, I'm just waiting for the DLC to be announced. That's gonna be the quickest pre-order you've ever seen. Stray is the best game I've ever played. Period. You probably think I'm lying, because how could that cat game that nobody talked about a week after its release be my game of the year? Well, for starters, the graphics are the best in the business. The controls are so simple, anyone could beat it, which might be one of the reasons why it was so popular. But the reason why Stray wins my game of the year is because of this. This adorable cat stands out as a new mascot for gaming. It's iconic, yet simple, like Mario or Sonic, except nobody's gonna be talking about this cat in a month. Now, you guys know how much I've been hating on Stray this whole year, but my only real complaint with this game was that it felt a bit overpriced, and that the story wasn't interesting or have anything to do with you being a cat, or that the gameplay wasn't really innovative in any way, shape, or form, or that you could beat the game in 4 hours and it had no replay value. But hey, other than that, Stray just barely beat Sonic Frontiers. But let's get a second opinion from my good friend Nokia. What do you think about the game, man?
I mean, for the amount of money you have to purchase for the game, you get quite a low amount of value. So I'd say it's not worth Game of the Year. And plus, it's shit.